Okay, you are now live.
Got it. Okay, I just had a little picture come up on my thing. You're ready to go. Okay. Good evening, everybody, and we're going to call the meeting to order. We have no 3-minute delegations tonight. I'd like the approval of the agenda for the June 21st, 2021 Stone Mills Council meeting. Moved by Doug, second by Sherry. And then on that meeting, we're going to add a closed session on the agenda. So later on, we're going to go into closed session. We just want to add on the agenda. Everybody in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Any conflicts of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Showing none. Like approval of the minutes of the June 7th, 2021 regular council meeting. Moved by Wenda, second by Kevin. Any questions or comments? All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. No deputation, no bylaws. We're going to go down to staff reports, and we're going to start off with the manager of finance, Christina, and that also coming into there, it's going to be Lori and Stephanie partway through. So Christina, do you want to take over here, please?
With your permission, I'd like to admit Lori and Stephanie and allow them to do the presentation.
Okay, good enough. Okay, we have Councillor Thompson on here.
Yep. And this is Lori Huber and Stephanie Mahardy from KPMG. And I will turn it over to them. Sort of. I'm going to screen share their presentation.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Maybe if I could get a thumbs up, if you can hear me okay, then it will be good. Awesome. This is the third Zoom for the day, and I was hoping the third time would be the charm and you could hear me. So we've got success. So I think our presentation tonight will be shared on the screen. I'll certainly walk you through the highlights of our presentation to speak to the 2020 financial statements, and it will really be in 3 parts. The first piece will speak to the audit, the second will speak to the financial statements, and we've also included a third piece this year that speaks to some of the comparative information for Stone Mills relative to some of your peer groups. So with that, I don't know if you see a screen share. I do not.
Trying.
Here we go. Okay. All right. So I can see it. So at the very start, we will speak to the independent auditor's report. So our independent auditor's report is our deliverable to the annual financial statement audit process. If you've had an opportunity to take a read through the financial statements, it is an clean or an unqualified audit opinion again this year, which is certainly something that you would hope and you would want to see. Another important audit concept that we are required to evaluate each and every year is the level of materiality, which really sort of shells out the level and the detail in terms of our audit testing to be able to opine on the financial statement. So I provided that information for you there. So we completed the financial statement audit as a whole this year at a materiality level of 270,000. And that's important because when you look at our audit opinion, it says in all material respects, the financial statements do present fairly. So to the extent we've identified any differences through the course of our audit work this year, we have included those as part of our findings to the extent they were in excess of $13,500, which is a pure math exercise based on that materiality being 5%. So where we are today with respect to the audit is we are essentially complete, subject to approval by council here tonight for the financial statements for the 2020 year. In terms of executing our audit, certainly no difficulties. We completed our audit in accordance with our plan, and certainly our audit plan did look a little different this year. We did give lots of consideration to the impact of the pandemic, having the pandemic as 9 months in fiscal 2020. And then in terms of disagreements or difficulties with management, as I said, certainly no difficulties, and they've been quite gracious to work through the audit this year. Just for the benefit of the group, we have completed the audit entirely remote. Fortunately, we did have the technology, and management was very open to making sure that the audit was digitized this year. So no difficulties there either to report. in terms of accounting standards this year, there were no significant accounting standards that came to play in the financial statements, but one accounting standard that is looming, I would say, on the horizon, which is coming in 2023. And I know the treasurer is certainly staying on top of this new pervasive standard for the municipal sector as a whole. It relates to asset retirement obligations. So we're still a couple of years out, but certainly stay tuned for more information as that time does come near. What was new and different this year was a new audit standard. So auditing standards don't come along very often. They certainly are less common than accounting standards, but one new one that we were required to address in our audit this year spoke to the audit of accounting estimates. So as you know, any financial statement does include a number of estimates in the financial statements, and there were incremental requirements on us this year because of this new audit standard. And you can see there, I've highlighted the two that were most significant to the financial statements this year. They certainly aren't new estimates, but it relates to your landfill closure and post-closure liability, along with the employee post-employment benefits liability. So we've done the work relative to the new standard and certainly no significant findings to bring forth this year. So moving on to the next slide, just to give you a high level overview in terms of the areas of audit focus this year. So again, I would say comparing this year to the previous year, fairly similar, subject to the new audit standard for the 4th and 5th bullet you see there on your screen. But certainly COVID did have an impact this year as COVID funds were received, making sure that the performance criteria for the revenue recognition was met was certainly part of it. Taking a different look at any receivables this year in terms of any collection risk relative to the impact of the pandemic and the economic consequences because of that, taxation valuation allowances, and then one that we always pay attention to as well, since capital assets are a significant part of your balance sheet, making sure the right assets are on your balance sheet and the right amounts are flowing through your statement of operations. So we've done all of that work again this year, and certainly no significant findings to bring forth to this group. So to the extent we identified any differences through the course of our audit work in the financial statements, there is nothing that we have identified that have not been corrected in the financial statements. So the financial statements presented to you tonight are the real financial statements, if you will, and there's certainly nothing that has been left off book, which is always something we should have a conversation with those charged with governance. Another item in our audit process is to identify any areas where there might be significant internal control weaknesses based on our audit procedures. So I'm happy to report again here tonight. There's certainly nothing new and different that have been identified through the course of our audit work. I will say we have again given consideration to the impact of COVID and the impact of, employees working from home and remote work arrangements and things in terms of the digitization or the electronic approvals and processes and controls in light of COVID. And again, nothing similar to report in that area either. And the very final piece that you'll see there on the screen speaks to our independence. So as your external auditors, we are always required to be very mindful of our independence. It's that independent set of eyes that really bring value to the audit, to the financial statement. So to the extent we might provide any non-audit services to the township through the course of the year, in terms of other matters, we should be open and transparent with respect to that. And there's certainly nothing this year that might be thought to encroach on our independence. So again, nothing significant to report, but making sure that we're mindful of that conversation. So that's the piece on the audit side of the house. So part 2 speaks to the actual numbers of the financial statement. So as you'll recall, the consolidated statement of financial position really speaks to the township's assets and liabilities at the close of business being December 31, 2020. So you can see there, the township again this year for 2020 has reported, you'll see on the next slide, it has reported a healthy surplus for the year, and that's really driven up the increase in your net financial assets. So you are in a very healthy net asset financial position compared to the previous year, moving from 6.6 million up to 8 million. And then we'll see in a few slides as well, in terms of the overall accumulated amounts, you're sitting at just over 47 million, which is an increase from the previous year from 44.8. So moving to the next slide, we'll get into some of the specifics in terms of some of the changes year over year. So first out of the gate, we always like to talk about cash. So how much money is sitting in the bank? And you can see there was a healthy increase this year compared to the previous year. So about $780,000 on a net basis. If you've had an opportunity to read through the financial statements, you'll see the change in cash very clearly articulated through the various accounts on the statement of cash flows. So your surplus this year, sitting just over $2 million, has certainly provided significant cash to be able to fund capital additions and then also service some of the debt that's sitting on the balance sheet. Accounts receivable have increased significantly this year by about 1.2 million. You can see going from 550,000 to just over 1.75 million. A couple of things driving that change this year. I'm sure you'll recall there was funding this year relative to the ISIP program, so Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. This year, there were also significant HST rebates sitting on the balance sheet as well, reflective of the capital activity at the end of the year. So although the balance is high, it is a function of timing at year end and certainly nothing from a collection risk that has caused us any concern. In terms of tangible capital assets, you'll see that sort of 3/4 of the way down the page. You'll see that on a net basis, tangible capital assets have moved from 37 million up to 38 million. That's a combination of a couple of different things. So you will see in the financial statements, there were in-year additions of about $2.7 million. And I've given you 3 bullets there just to highlight what some of the bigger items were in year. So they should sound familiar, hopefully. The Brock and Durham Street reconstruction, there was purchase of machinery and equipment, and also resurfacing and upgrades to some roads that formed a large piece of those in-year additions. And then, of course, beyond that, there is also the annual charge for amortization, and that amounted to about $2 million this year. So on a net basis, that is the cause for the increase year over year, just over $700,000. The other piece that sits on your balance sheet within your liabilities speaks to the landfill closure and post-closure liability. I would say a fairly substantial change this year, an increase to that liability, just over 700,000. So it's sitting at the end of 2020 at about $1.8 million. And again, as I said earlier, from an audit perspective, that certainly is an estimate. And the team does employ the use of an external expert to look at that liability and look at the costs to come in the future and the usage and so on. That is updated annually, and that is reflective of what the engineers have provided the team with. Moving on to the next page, we always like to see some graphs to share the story. And on this one, you'll see we've provided taxes receivable as a percentage of total levy. I know taxes receivable are always cause for discussion, certainly at councils. And you can see here the story is a good one. So you can see as well in the financial statements, the levy has increased year over year. However, the taxes receivable as a percentage of the levy has actually held pretty steady over the course of the last 3 years, and certainly well below where things were in 2016 and 2017. So again, certainly in light of COVID as well, I think that's really a great news story from a collection standpoint. The next slide speaks to, again, just for comparative purposes over the course of the last 5 years, the investment in tangible capital assets. And you can see with the grant funding that was available in 2020, certainly capital additions were significantly greater than where they have been over the course of the last 4 years. And if you had a chance to look in the financial statements, just to give you more information around your tangible capital assets, because I know that's always lots for discussion as well, you can see the breakdown between your cost and your accumulated amortization. And that ratio at your township is about 50%. So 50% book value compared to gross cost. So I would say you're right sort of in the middle of the range, and the investments in capital are certainly trying to keep pace. And I know the treasurer is working hard on asset management plans as required. And certainly that's lots of topic for discussion as well. The next slide, again, on tangible capital assets, just gives you a sense of where those additions are. And you can see a significant investment, again, this year on the roads, just over 78% of the total. So then that takes us to the next slide, which is the accumulated municipal surplus. So that, again, the municipal surplus is the total assets minus the total liabilities. And as you can see at the end of the year, significant increase over the previous year because of the in-year surplus. So when you break it down into its component pieces, you can see a large part of that is certainly the investment in tangible capital assets sitting at just over 38 million. So that's the net book value less the debt, of course, that was taken out on any capital additions. You've got sitting in there as well the unfunded piece to the landfill liability at the end of the year. And then we get into the reserves and the reserve funds. So you can see the reserves have increased significantly year over year. And you can see with the breakout that we provided in the notes to the financial statements where each of those amounts have gone. And certainly a new significant one this year, as you're all aware of, is the municipal modernization piece, just over $500,000. And again, the next slide, we've given you a graphic to just show the story with respect to reserves and reserve funds over the course of the last 5 years. And you can certainly see quite a healthy trend, trending upwards over the course of time in terms of the overall reserve and reserve funds. And I know Stephanie in her presentation in terms of a comparative analysis will speak to this a little bit later on as well. So then that takes us to the statement of operations. So the statement of operations speaks to the in-year activity from both a revenue and expense perspective. And here I would say is another good news story for the township for fiscal 2020. So you can see a fairly healthy increase year over year in terms of revenues. However, a part of that will be the capital revenues coming in to fund certain capital projects. Also, there was an in-year one-time amount that we will see called insurance proceeds this year, just over $840,000, primarily related to the Camden East Library damages that were incurred and proceeds received therefrom. And also, of course, property taxation has increased year over year, relatively close to budget, subject to a slight change because of the write-offs in year. So all of those things together, revenues have increased by about 12.6% over the previous year. And when we look on the bottom half of the page, we've outlined the different expenses by department. And you can see the expenses have increased by about $500,000 year over year, 504,000 or 5%. And I would say in speaking to the team, they've worked exceptionally hard this year in light of COVID to try to manage expenses to make sure the financial health of the organization through the course of the pandemic. And I think this certainly shares part of that story. So you will see in the notes to the financial statements, there were incremental expenses this year related to COVID-19, just over $200,000. There were incremental IT expenses, just over $140,000. In there as well is the change to the landfill liability of just over $700,000. And to offset those increases, there were other decreases as well. The most significant decrease that we saw in the accounts related to the salaries and benefits, primarily related to the seasonal employees impacted by COVID in areas like the arena. The next slide speaks to, again, the graphic that breaks out the expenses for the year by department. And again, you can see more than half of the expenses in year speak to transportation. So with that, Stephanie, I will pass it over to you to walk through the highlights of the comparative analysis.
Thanks, Lori. So just moving into the next slide. So here are just some high-level overview of the population for context. So the following slides are based off of prior year 2019 FIR information, and the comparators were selected based on discussions with management. So as you can see, these 4 other municipalities were chosen by management as the most comparable. So moving into the next slide. Here you have percentage of expenses by segment. So this just provides a high-level visual representation of how the proportion of spending compares to the other municipalities. So you'll see Stone Mills is relatively in line with the others, slightly higher transportation expenses than the comparators, but as you can see, this is pretty comparable to Central Frontenac with similar types of roadways, maintenance work, and construction needed, geographically speaking. So moving on to the next slide. So here you have percentage of expenses by type, a similar thing as the previous slide, but this time categorized by accounting expense categories. And you can see that Stone Mills is not so much statistically different from the other comparators, and an expected salaries and benefits and materials expense comprise the largest proportion of expenses. So going into the next slide, you have taxation revenue per household. So you'll see that Stone Mills is within that average kind of upper 2000s range and is actually the second highest of the group. But with Stone Mills having one of the higher tax rates in general expected, which you can see on the next slide. So here you have taxation as a percentage of property assessment values, and at 12%, Stone Mills is in the higher end relative to its comparators, but overall the range, as you can see in the tax percentage, is pretty small. So going into the next slide, you have the net financial position, which is assets over liabilities. And typically you'd like to see this in a positive, and you'll see that Stone Mills here is in a positive, which is a good thing and is pretty in line too with comparators, save for Lanark Highland. Finally, you have the reserve fund comparison. So this is reserve funds per household. So Stone Mills is at a healthy amount, being the second highest in the range. And the good thing is that most of the reserves are in discretionary versus obligatory. So more flexibility there in terms of spend. So that really takes us to the end of our presentation.
Thanks very much, Steph. So that was a high-level overview of the financial statements for the 2020 year, along with our audit, and perhaps we would welcome any questions from the group.
Go ahead, John.
Yes, thank you. Could you just elaborate on the reason that the landfill closure costs or reserve or whatever we're calling it has grown by such a significant amount?
Sure, I can speak to that at a high level, and perhaps the treasurer might want to chime in as well. So this year, so the landfill liability is an estimate. This year, I believe there was a more detailed analysis of the costs incurred and the costs to come in the future, along with a slight change in the discount rate, which then drives the liability on the balance sheet. So it's a combination of a number of factors this year based on the information provided by the engineering firm. And it is an estimate, so any changes to any of the inputs is dealt with prospectively.
Thank you. So the closure care expenses are calculated to be almost $3 million now. Previously, it was a bit under 2 million. And the different waste sites, I'm just reading this, Lori, off the report, because we did have the engineer reporting to us a few meetings ago as well. And I just need my memory refreshed. So Sheffield is estimated to have 22 years left, Moscow 73 years, Camden East 16 years. So when Camden East is the first to close in 16 years, do the estimates for the other two sites take into account that there will now be garbage that would have gone to Camden East going to those? See what I mean? Like should
yes.
their estimated lifetimes be, so that takes into account as each landfill closes, the last one standing is Moscow, and it will still last for 73 years.
It should, in theory, based on their tables that they use today.
Right, that their estimates of future capacity and so on, because you can understand why that's critical.
Exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
they should.
Okay, that clarifies it. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, just one. I noticed in 2019, I'm probably wrong with this, but the federal gas tax proceeds in 2019 it was 478,000, and in 2020 it was 233. Maybe I'm reading that wrong. I think it was on page 15 that I seen it, and I just wondered what the difference were. Maybe.
So we received a second top up in 2019, or no, 2020. I have to look. One of the 2 years we received a doubling of the amount. It was a
Okay, so that-
one-time funding doubling. Yeah,
Oh, that would have been in 2019 then. That's what explains why
Yes,
it's twice as much.
2019.
Okay, great. Thank you. I noticed the difference in them and wondered what it was. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the waste landfill there and the unfunded amounts. Is it possible, not tonight, but is it possible that we could get a few paragraphs written to explain where we are with that unfunded amount so it's clear in everybody's mind?
Sure, I'd be happy to work with management to be able to provide something. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any more questions or comments? Go ahead, Councilor Lon.
Yes, I was just wondering, there are some really good graphs that you've provided for us tonight. And are we able to publish these on the website with, qualifying statements, such as the ones that you gave when you were presenting those different graphs? The pie charts in particular were really impressive, tell a big story.
I always find personally the graphics are so much easier to sort of visualize. So absolutely, I can work again with the team to provide them with those graphs, and I don't have an issue with sharing them at all.
Okay, they can go on our website, in other words.
I would say that you might not want KPMG on your website with those graphs, but certainly we could strip that and management could provide, just make it their own. I don't think that would be an issue at all.
Yeah, thank you.
You okay with that, Christina?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? So I guess, Lori, the township are really not too bad a shape.
I think you asked me that question a year ago, and yes, I have to say, I think you've weathered the storm, but heading into the storm, I think you were well positioned, which is why I said the comments I did say to you last fall. And certainly, in speaking with the team, I think they've had a busy year, maybe didn't accomplish everything that they wanted to accomplish, but I think the financial result that you've come out with for 2020 is certainly something to be proud of.
Okay, thank you. With anything else being said, well, Lori and Stephanie, I'd like to thank you for time and explain everything. And with that being said, we are looking for a motion for the approval of the report. Is that what you want, Christina?
Receive and approve the financial statements.
Receive. Okay, moved by Sherry, second by Wenda. Any more questions or comments? All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Good night.
Good
Thank you.
night. Have a great rest of your
Good night.
meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, moving forward, go to the Public Works, Jeff Thompson, the tenders.
Thank you, Your Worship. You have a report in front of you. It is as it reads. There's no changes to it. Looking for a motion to support the purchase of the rubber-tired excavator from Hardington.
Okay, any questions for Jeff before we get the motion? Go ahead, Kevin, I see your hand up.
I was just going to make the motion.
Okay, motion moved by Kevin, looking for a second by Sherry. All in favor of the motion? Or did we have any questions first? Sorry, John, do you have
Yeah.
something? Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Jeff, I'm assuming you threw in the question about the whole ram because you were considering purchasing one, but that's not part of the of your request, or just what's happening with the whole ram, I guess is my question.
That was an extra attachment that we put into the RFQ just to get price the market. Maybe someday we'll afford one, but right now with what we had budgeted and the use that we would have for it didn't outweigh the cost. So we removed it from the final price.
So in other words, the amount of work we'd have for a whole ram, we might as well hire that out.
Hire it out, sub it out.
Right. Okay, thanks.
We have enough work to keep the machine going without adding another attachment to it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Doug, I see your hand up.
Yeah, Jeff, are we doing a trade-in here?
I'll have a future report to declare it as surplus, and there is a trade-in value that I just received today. And we'll make the decision whether to trade it in with the supplier or list it on one of our gov deals or advertise it as surplus.
Okay, so the plan is to replace the existing hole.
That's right.
Thank you.
Any more questions or comments? We have a motion on the floor. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. We'll move to Chief Building Official Detler of the Stone Mills Recreation Center tender. Go ahead, Jake.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of things going on. I got somebody knocking on my door just as I went to go on here. Wonderful. Yeah, so a lot going on at the Tamworth Arena as well. A lot of decisions to be made about what we're going to do going forward. Unfortunately, we only got one price. Our timeline was very aggressive, and the one price that we did have, came with persons in the form of Freecon Construction being upfront and honest and saying that this was likely going to carry on much after our date, and we have we're trying to build more greater use of our facility. And certainly, shutting down our facility to users, especially after COVID, the last couple of years, for months on end, it would probably be a terrible thing for our business model. And so we're looking to cancel and basically immediately retender with different dates, as per our solicitor's advice about how we should proceed. The one thing that I've been looking at that recommendation and kind of scratching my head is how do we separate the projects, given that they are connected by a brine or glycol solution, and you kind of got to, in a perfect world, they happen both at the same time. I really didn't think that there would be any problem with trying to extend with either of the granting agencies, but after I had a conversation with the Ontario Trillium Foundation last week, they were very adamant that it is a good possibility that they would rescind, given that it didn't look like we were going to be able to complete this in 2021. It's going to be really difficult if they decide to rescind and we do cancel this tender. It's going to be really difficult to get a working chiller in place in 2021 and get that funding from them, given that we're scrapping this tender and not going that direction. So anyways, that's kind of the long story of what has happened here. So I'm just open to taking questions now. So
Okay, go ahead, Kevin.
Jake, you said an operating chiller. It had to be in and operating. What if it's just sitting in there? Things are there, just not hooked up. What's the difference to them? And if it would get us that contract or that money,
that's a really good question.
Set it in there, and yeah, there it is. It's there. How do they know it's not working? Or I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'll respond to that, Councillor Richmond. Yeah, you've been to ribbon ceremonies and all of that. They made it pretty plain on the phone that just a receipt for the purchase of it, which is only part of the fees, right? Obviously, there's labor to install. Yeah, they want to have a ribbon ceremony, and it's got to be in place by that date in 2021. That was pretty clear on the phone. But yeah, I definitely you're not the first person, Councillor Richmond, to suggest that path. So.
Sneaky, eh?
Okay, Wendy, I think you had your hand up first.
Yeah, Jake, there was one option that you discussed in your report about splitting the project in two, where we could do a portion of it now and fulfill the grant, the Trillium grant, and then the other portion we could do later. Is that something that you're in favor of, or are you not in favor of doing that?
Yeah, so I'll respond, Your Worship, to Councillor Lalonde. Yeah, so I'm not in favor of it. That's not how we want to do it. But if we get stuck between a rock and a hard place, We're going to have to really, do a lot of stick handling to find out what scenario is best for us. In that report, that was kind of me trying to think my way through what happens if we get in between that rock and a hard place. We really want to move to glycol because it'll save us dollars in the end each year through efficiency. I'm not a refrigeration expert, but apparently you can cool off that slab way more efficiently with glycol than you can with a salt brine. And that's why everybody's been moving to it. There are some other advantages as well, but that's the main advantage. Today, if you went to Tamworth Arena or the Stone Mills Recreation Center, those lines are all full of that old salt brine process, and switching and putting a glycol appliance in there and getting those lines flushed with the old salt brine refrigerant and placing glycol could be significantly difficult. And there would be some added costs to what we were planning to try to do something like that. So I mean Council of Land, that's a scenario we may have to look at, separating projects, but it certainly isn't something we'd want to jump into unless we were forced to maybe look at something like that. So
Okay, we're gonna go to Doug and then John. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, Jake, what makes you think that we're going to be any better off next year? It's a massive amount of work to take the pad out of that, and with the season trying to run the full season, you end up with a very short period of time, like 3.5 months, 4 months, to do this work. Are we not just going to find ourselves in the same situation next year? That's part one. Part two, my memory tells me that we changed that chiller about 20 years ago. Is that not correct?
yeah, thanks, Councillor Davison. I'm not exactly sure what the date is on that chiller, but I think it is more than 20 years old, Councillor Davison, and it's to the point where the current maintenance provider, Simcoe Refrigeration, views it as a liability that needs to be replaced.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Councillor Davison.
There's two systems in there, is there not? Something in the back of my mind says we replaced them on the first term of council after amalgamation, and I thought we replaced both systems. Anyways, that's not important. It needs to be doing. I just wonder if we shouldn't bite the bullet and go ahead and do it this year.
Okay, I'll respond to that, Councillor Davis. One of the things that I have a hard time, if you know what I mean. So if we cancel this tender now, you open the procurement bylaw. Now we're into however many days. Now we're writing a new tender. Now we're into waiting that days. Now we're awarding another tender, and guess what? How fast things come when you order them. There's always slowdowns in 2021. We're going to be hard pressed to go another month before ordering this and then get that in for September 15th. That's just me thinking out loud, Councillor Davison. So.
I hear you. And what I'm saying is September 15th really a drop dead date, or can we not delay the opening for a month or whatever? We seen what happened in Piccadilly. I mean, they closed for the whole season last year.
Brian, you want to go ahead there, step in?
Yeah, Your Worship, I'm trying to step in and help Jake from a third party perspective. So North Frontex issue is when you essentially go to a glycol system and then try to switch, like to retrofit and go from the salt brine to the glycol, essentially it congeals in the pipes. And so therefore there's the risk that you may lose some of the infrastructure as a result of that retrofit. So the September 15th, Councillor Davison, we were prepared to look at a month as part of extra, but conversation with the contractor is that a month isn't necessarily feasible, that ideally this might be into December as part of a completion date. And so our concern is that although our local users may wait and utilize, we may have a number of transient users from other facilities that find ice elsewhere, which may be difficult to get those back after the construction. So the hope was that if we did a tender, so if you were looking at the timelines that we have this year, we're already essentially the end of June. If we went ahead, we re-tendered and had this process as it was ready to start on April 1st, 2022, they would have from April to September, and worst case scenario, it would go to October. But we would have from now till then, we would have already had the contract signed. So if there's any savings for acquiring equipment, et cetera, to get prepared to do that application, we would have lots of time to secure that to ensure that we're not having backups due to availability and taking into consideration some of the supply issues that might be holding this project up. So exactly what I think you're suggesting as far as biting the bullet and going, but making sure that we can get access to the equipment is actually what's driving the logic of trying to facilitate these both in 2022 while ensuring that we still have a real strong chance of meeting our opening and closing of our community center. So if we took the timeline that they had now, we're essentially looking July to December, we're talking 5 months. That's the equivalent of taking April to September, and worst case scenario, we might be early October. So it's the same logic, different approach as far as trying to maintain those opening dates. We're just not really sure with the supply issues and the built-in. So inside our tender, we also there was a penalty clause, which is now, as we know it, a real strong deterrent for applicants submitting during COVID because of the supply and demand of some of the equipment. So I would suspect if I was from a financial analytics perspective, that there's a considerable portion of overage built into that budget to subsidize their bid because they're not comfortable hitting the timeline that we've established, and they're factoring in some penalty for that extended deadline.
Okay. John, I think you had your hand up.
Well, thank you. That discussion clarified some things for me. So I'm just trying to get the different financial scenarios straight in my head. So the chiller grant, Jake, is 150,000. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how much of the total cost of the chiller and installation does that cover? Does that cover 100% or
100?
Okay. And it sounds to me like the risk of trying to install that this year and flushing that brine is that's too much of a gamble. Is that correct? That's a hard call.
That's a gamble for council to have in terms of. It's a real punch to the gut to lose 150,000, John. So, or Deputy Reeve John.
Deputy Reeve John. John is fine, Jake. We're all friends here, and I'm not wearing my star anyway. So when do you expect to hear about the feasibility or the possibility of having that grant extended? I know they were discouraging you, but they are going to ask. Is that correct?
Deputy Reeve, we were told today that we'll know by Wednesday.
Okay, so if they'll extend it, then no problem. If they won't, what would the total cost over and above the federal grant be that would have to be borne by the township, assuming we would have to then pay for the chiller ourselves?
If you're using the tender results that we received,
that's all we've got to go on.
Yeah. Okay. So we came in I believe it was 80,000 over budget, plus the 266 we were born to take on originally. So there you're into that number, and then you would add 150 to that, and then we would be in. That's the number we would be in if we lose the
Trillium grant.
The Trillium grant.
$500,000.
So yeah, but we were prepared to take on that 260-some thousand anyway. So that's something we already committed to. So we're talking about $230,000 more than we had originally committed to. Is that right? 150 plus 80.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That would be correct, Deputy Rice.
Okay. Okay. All right, that gives me some idea. So really, that's what we got to decide is, are we willing to find in reserves or through some taxation another 230,000 or whatever it is? Yeah, 230 for this project for 2022. Okay.
Go ahead, Doug.
Well, I think at this time, we should decide that we'll wait for Wednesday and have a quick Zoom call Wednesday evening or something to decide so we know where we're going. Right now, we don't know where we're going financially.
Sorry.
I did, your worship. It's exactly as Councillor Davidson has said. We intend to respect the timeline to review from the director at Trillium. But following that, we would look to lobby both governing agencies, Trillium, if they did decline it, to try to, express our position and explain what the difficulties have been of putting this together with regards to trying to do both projects at the same time. But there is an appetite, at least from my position, to canvass the granting agency for the other portion of the project. If we're in a situation to choose, we may lobby the government to see whether there's any opportunity to slightly increase that grant to offset any differences between the two, if we're in the situation where we have to choose. So from the perspective of knowing what we knew on Friday and knowing now that Trillium is under consideration, our hope is that council will give us time to consider this. And once we've reached an absolute decision, we can either call a special meeting to discuss it, or we would have a decision in place and brought the recommendation back to council at the next council meeting, if that was to support the extension of the grant deadlines.
Yeah, I think we got to look forward here a little bit with this here being the amount of money we could lose, and then if we do put it in, the cost of flushing and whatnot. So, I'm in favor of waiting until Wednesday and come back with a report and see where we're going to go with this. Anybody else have any comments? Okay, so I'm looking for a motion here, what we're going to do on this here for tonight. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, well, a motion to receive and await the decision of the on the Trillium grant, and then based on that decision, we meet again and decide how to proceed. Does that cover it?
Okay, and looking for a seconder. Second by Doug. Any questions or comments? All in favor of the motion? The motion is carried. Okay, we're going to get down to new business from statements from members. I got, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I had a note from Carolyn Sinclair with the proposed skate park for Tamworth. She's just a little bit in the dark, and maybe staff have talked to her since, so forgive me, Jake or Brian, if this has already been dealt with. She's not sure if what exactly the township's position is on this. I told her we certainly were supportive of her efforts. She's wondering, do we have to identify a location before she goes ahead with fundraising, or does she have to raise funds before we'll identify a location? And I'm just wondering where we actually stand in terms of the skate park at this point.
Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Worship, Deputy Reeve Wise. So I think this probably comes from a discussion that I had with Ms. Sinclair. She had asked whether there had been any further progress, and when I spoke to her, and from what I was receiving from both the arena manager and the CBO's property manager, was that they were also expecting that we should try to space this project at the recreation facility in Tamworth. So we had kind of agreed that we just needed to know what size of location would be needed to be earmarked for that project, and for how long, as far as starting fundraising, etc. The conversation was slightly confusing from that point on, in the sense that there seemed to be some expectation that the municipality was contributing financially to this project. And so I had said that at this point, council had supported the project in principle, and that it agreed to try to find a location, but that there was no motion on the books as far as financial statement to commence project or anything of that nature. That I believe the expectation was that fundraising efforts would continue. And then, if anything was requested of council, that would have to be brought back as a separate issue to council, because to my knowledge, there was no commitment from a financial perspective from council. So that's where things are as far as we believe, and Jake may want to speak to this, but a small portion of the property that they had identified would probably be able to be facilitated to the rear of the fire station near the soccer diamond or the soccer field. But it's just a matter of then what are the logistics of the project going forward. There appeared to be an expectation that council was going to, or somebody like maybe even the township was going to start taking the lead on the project. And that's where things kind of become relatively unclear between Carolyn and myself.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so it sounds like you and Carolyn need to talk some more so that everybody's clear on where things are at. I'm certainly hoping that if council isn't going to entertain an actual dollar contribution, I'm assuming that in-kind equipment time, like just an excavation or something like that, is something we would consider. We've certainly done that on other projects. So perhaps we should have a staff report on that presents that as a possibility, and we could at least make some kind of commitment or not in that regard. So there's more clarification on where the township stands in terms of that kind of thing. Would that be fair, Brian?
I think that's the expectation, Your Worship and Deputy Reeve, is that if there's in-kind contributions as far as gravel material, machine time that we have, certainly we could contribute in that form. But I think from the fundraising perspective is that a lot of the dollars need to be, fundraised in advance as far as design, and then we would be able to determine what we could actually offer. Certainly it's not my forte as far as the equipment necessary to do the work, but I think there's a willingness from the Public Works Department. If there's something we can do to help, within the resources we have, we can help, but we're not sure what that construction and that equipment and material looks like until we see somewhat of a conceptual design as to what we're actually thinking of building.
Yeah, so that's certainly a key point, Brian, and that's certainly on Carolyn and her committee. They're going to have to step up and at least get some kind of preliminary design before we can go forward. Okay, thanks. That clarifies it for me. Thank you.
Hey, Doug, had your hand up. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I received a letter last week from a representative of the Camden Reedville Women's Institute. And basically, I'll just paraphrase it a little bit. They're asking if we could have a sign, Reedville, have placed in recognition of the fact that it was a hamlet area at one time historically, like Desmond and other areas in the township with Wymus and that do have signs. So they wrote me a little letter stating that the Camden Reedville Women's Institute is 85 years old, and it's the only women's institute in the township today of Stone Mills. And they do have trouble when it comes to meetings and things like that. People don't know where Reedville is now. We all know that Reedville is an area, not a village or a hamlet. It's an area. But there used to be a sign up on the hill there away from the school a little bit years ago, and for some reasons it's disappeared. I spoke to Jeff on this, and Jeff says that there's a policy at the county to place historical signs, but it would need a recommendation from council to do that. So I would like to ask, or I would move a motion that council approach the county TAC committee, requesting a historical Reedville sign located in the Reedville area.
We have a motion on the floor. You second that, John? Yep, seconder.
Yeah.
Any questions or comments? You have anything to say on that, Jeff?
No, that's good. I'll take it to the TAC meeting and we can discuss it and just make sure we got consistency through the county on the historical sites.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Everybody in favor of the motion? Motion's carried.
Thank you.
Any other new business members? Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I brought up the Neville's Point speed issue the last council meeting. Jeff said he was going to have a look into it. Maybe he can enlighten us on that. And I would think that we want a 40-kilometer sign along with a couple children at play or something, signs to that effect on that street. So maybe Jeff can talk to that.
Go ahead, Jeff,
Yeah.
if you got support.
Through you, your worship, I did have a report ready last fall, but it was for 50 kilometers an hour. The study that we did with just our own speed spy and not speed spy, but our speed message sign, 50 kilometers seemed to be the average speed through there. So I've got the OPP looking at it with their speed spy, and they will, similar to what we did in the past on Centerville Road and other locations, and they'll report back, and we'll see what we can do to get it to a 40. And for the children playing signs, I've told most residents the ones that they buy at Home Hardware and put in their front yards they're more effective than the signs that we put up. They become noise in the background, and after a year, nobody pays attention to them. So they're black and white, and they look like a street sign. But the ones that they can move around and looks like something new, it's more effective and catches the people's eye.
Jeff, would we know this by next council meeting so we can move ahead with it? Or
Yeah, when's the next council meeting? 2 weeks?
July 12th. 3.
Yeah, I should have something back from the OPP by then.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Brian has something, then we're gonna go to Wenda. Go ahead, Brian.
Your worship, I spoke earlier today, and I apologize for not putting this on the agenda. The requests come in slightly later from staff, and I realized we're not going to be together before this is going to be relevant. This year, Canada Day falls on July 1st, which is a Thursday. Normal municipal hours are on Fridays. We're open till 12:30. The personnel department of our township has a vacation request from every office staff member looking to take July 2nd off as a vacation day. With lots of notice, I'm hoping the council will provide us approval to amend the municipal hours for that day and actually close for an extended period. There's been a number of limitations for our staff to take some vacation, and I'm certainly trying to get them to utilize their vacation to get some job separation and enjoy some family time now that things are opening. And I would like to close our office on July 2nd for that half day for an extended weekend with all of our staff using vacation for that Friday.
Go ahead, Wenda.
I'd like to make a motion to that effect.
Okay, seconded by Sherry. Okay, any questions or comments? I have no problem with it. Brian and I discussed it today, and I think it's a great idea. Give those people a little bit of a break there and a few days off. So with that being said, all in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Okay, go ahead, Wenda, down to you.
Yes, at our last meeting, Debbie brought up an idea that we should have a special meeting to discuss the letter from the CCCE and the official plan and different elements that were brought up during that discussion. And I haven't heard anything, and I was just wondering if staff has given consideration to when they would like to hold that meeting.
Brian, do you have any help on this?
Sure. I'm not sure if Jay's just logging in, it looks like.
Oh, Jay's there. Sorry. Hi, Jay.
So the first thing for my your worship is trying to stay connected to the development approvals process and the official plan update. So I'm hoping that these all kind of go, they coincide with each other. But I'll let Jason take the discussion on this one.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Councillor Lalonde. I appreciate bringing that up for tonight's discussion. It's very timely, and today actually was the day where staff have just finalized what we need from an official plan draft 1 update perspective. So I'm working to amend our website actually to try and have a separate page dedicated for the official plan, so there's not confusion related to what is in draft form and being considered from an update perspective to what's already in place from an existing regulatory or policy document. So the plan is to have that opened up for public comment and technical review from all of our technical agencies for at minimum a 1-month period, and then hold special meetings of council to have discussion on that document based on its length outside of this dedicated council session. So I have not had direct communication with the CCCE as it relates to setting up a separate meeting for review of the document. But as I've mentioned in public forum previously, there will be sufficient public opportunity for comment through that process for not only members of the CCCE, however, all residents of the municipality.
Okay, Linda.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, anybody else? Go ahead, Sherry.
I just want to give a quick shout out to the Tamworth station of our Stone Mills Fire Department. My daughter and son-in-law and family had a scare in the night last night with a fire carbon monoxide detector, and everyone, it turned out fine. It was some kind of false alarm, but everyone that attended was just so professional and so caring. And it was just a reminder, that I think we take our volunteer firefighters for granted sometimes. And I just wanted to remind everyone that, if you see a firefighter in the next while, thank them very much. And also make sure you check your batteries in your smoke detectors. That's all.
Okay, anything else? I see none. With that being said, we're going to have the confirming bylaw for tonight meeting. Moved by John, second by Sherry. All in favor? Motion to adjourn. Moved by Doug, second by Wenda. All in favor? Carried. We're gonna go back to Zoom on our closed meeting here as soon as everybody makes the thing. Do you have something, John?
Well, yeah, usually, I know this came up at the last minute for a closed meeting, but perhaps Brian, we usually say for an educational matter or legal, can you just, for public record, give the general context of the purpose of this closed meeting tonight?
Thank you, Deputy Revise. I was trying to get my screen activated in time before it was adjourned. Yeah, so the matter before council this evening is a personnel human resource issue that will be brought to council's attention for an educational matter in camera.
Okay, thank you. Are we being sent a link for that meeting?
The link has already been sent and there'll
Okay.
be no decisions made by council. It's simply to inform them from an educational perspective.
Thank you.
See you soon.